JuGrTalk.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the JuGrTalk podcast. I'm your host, Justin Grimes, and I have a surprise for you today. Holy smokes. Check this out. How you doing? I think from now on, I'm just going to jump on the webcam and we'll take it from there. All right. So I think it'll be a fun idea, you know? Hey, nothing really is going to change. I do have a couple of new ideas for what we can do here on the show. I got a couple of new segments planned. I got my soundboard set up, but hey, check out the space, I could change the color, of course, for my background here. I got right now it's a kind of a purpley mood, but maybe I'll switch it to, maybe a little something warmer, maybe a little blue action. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. A little bit of this. I kind of like the blue. We can go with that, but hey, there it is. I just finished setting up my office. You could tell back here, I have my new record player stand, I set up like a whole thing. I even have like a little now playing shelf I set up back here too, I also have a bookcase set up behind me as well. Cool stuff. And yeah, I thought it'd be nice just to get a little visual going too, right? Other than the spinning head, right? I can always go back to the spinning head if I need to, of course, but I don't think my neck goes that way. So, it won't be by default. So, hey, hopefully this works out. I'm hoping this goes well. And of course, thank you for listening. Today is July 18th, 2025. It was a nice 74 degree here in upstate New York. All right. The weather's been really nice. Everything's been pretty good at home. And yeah, everything's been going all right. I do have a few notes about things that we could talk about today. We're going to be talking about pizza. That's definitely something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. Pizza, huge topic for me. All right. In my history with pizza specifically, because I did used to work at a pizza place, and I got plenty of stories I can go into on that. I also want to talk a little bit about video games. Okay. If you're not really into video games, totally understand. I'll keep everything pretty surface level. Primarily, I want to talk a little bit about my experience working at GameStop specifically. And I think the pizza work will go directly into GameStop stuff too. But we'll get there, We have some other topics I want to talk about and a new segment that I want to get into a little bit later on as well. All right. By the way, my name is Justin Grimes. I appreciate you being here. Let's get into it. Okay. So pizza. All right. We talked a little bit last time about what maybe your favorite pizza toppings were, right? I also asked you to leave in the comments, what's your favorite ice cream, right? Got some really interesting comments, but when it comes to pizza, what's your favorite type? Let me ask you. Drop it in the comments below if you have a favorite type of pizza, what your favorite toppings are. What's your favorite pizza place? Is it local? Is it a chain? Is it Domino's or Pizza Hut? Is it your local place? If you live in New York, odds are it's probably something relatively local, right? Although a lot of local places kind of have franchises too. You know what I mean? But that said, I have a favorite pizza. And it's real simple. Let me tell you, it is pepperoni. It's super basic, but I love a really good pepperoni pizza. As a baseline, pepperoni is the go-to, right? Somebody says, hey, I'm ordering pizza. What do you want? I say, just get a pepperoni, right out the gate. I try not to be complicated with my food orders, whether it's pizza, whether it's anything else, I keep it pretty simple, Like even if like somebody's like picking up a drive-through, they give me a call, hey, you want anything while I'm on the way home? I say, yeah, sure. Give me a McChicken. Nothing crazy, right? And that's it. No modifications, nothing. If there's a modification that needs to happen with a meal, guess what? I don't get that thing. I keep it simple. Even if I order for myself, for that matter, I like to keep it simple for the workers too. All right. I know how it goes. Things get complicated. You don't want things to be overly complicated, right? But with pizza, pepperoni is the best. All right. Objectively. If you're vegetarian, cheese, of course, is a great option. If you're vegan, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry if you're vegan, because there really aren't many good pizza options. I mean, you could go just sauce and crust, but what is that, right? I mean, there's like diet cheese and things like that, but it's not good. I will say though, if you're gluten-free, there's really good gluten-free pizza crusts. I've had really good gluten-free pizza. Usually it's like a thinner, kind of like a crackery kind of thing, but it's pretty good. Like I've had gluten-free pizza before. I'm not gluten-free, of course, but it's not bad. You definitely have options if you're gluten-free these days. But hey, you know what? Pepperoni pizza, I typically prefer like the New York style crust. I mean, go figure, right? Where it's like a little bit thinner with a nice thick crust on the end, You got to have the cheese and the sauce and the toppings going all the way to the edge for the most part. And then you have like the thick crust on the end, That's the good stuff. Like a nice clean triangle, a little bit floppy. You can kind of fold it with your hand like a taco, Like, you know what I mean? Like if you have the pizza, you kind of grab it like a little bit like this, I kind of do like the pinch and bite, the pinch and the bite, do a little bit of that. That's the good pizza. All right. But not to say that there's Chicago style pizzas that aren't good, right? I've had some Chicago style, but I feel like I have to eat it with a fork. It's a casserole, There's always a huge debate, like, oh, what's the better kind of pizza? Is it Chicago? Is it New York? Detroit? They have like a deep dish thing over there. But no, it's New York. Everybody knows that one. Come on. But pepperoni's the go-to, but my favorite pizza, if I am getting a couple of extra toppings, I'm going all out, right? Pepperoni and jalapeno and pineapple, all right? Get the whole combo, the sweet, the spicy, the savory, on the cheek. Look, you got all the food groups if you get all that, right? You got all the food groups covered, right? You could live off of pepperoni, jalapeno, pineapple pizza for the rest of your life, and you'd have all of your food groups covered, I'm pretty sure, right? It's all there, all right? You could just live off of it. Not to mention, it's just the best, I think I mentioned this last time, but olives are a no-go. No olives on my pizza. A lot of people like olives. Forget about it, all right? Which is interesting, right? Because like jalapenos and olives are very much in sort of the same group of food, I think. In the same way that kind of pickles are too, where it's like a jar of a thing that's savory, and sort of some sort of liquid. But I'm not about the olives. I don't know why. I've tried them. I've tried a couple different kinds, and I'm just not a fan. I don't know if it's like a texture thing or if it's just, honestly, they don't taste good. It's like it's too, I don't want to say pungent. It is kind of pungent, It's got that kind of weird kind of flavor to it without it being like spicy. It's just kind of off, in my opinion, So no olives on my pizza, all right? But pepperoni's the go-to. You got to go with the pepperoni, If a place doesn't have a good pepperoni pizza, forget about it, right? In fact, there's a place right down the street from me. It's called Bricks, okay? I don't know if you ever heard of this place. I think it might be a franchise, but it's like one of those pizza tavern bar kind of things, But their whole thing is like, it's all kind of like fancy tavern style pizzas, like the flatbread. And it's like, oh, okay, we got the pepperoni, but it also has like the hot honey and stuff on it, which is fine, right? But that ain't pizza, That's more of like more of a platter. It's more of an entree at that point. I want pizza. I want a pizza. I get a slice. You walk in, you get a slice or two, boom, you're out. Done. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of like the bougie pizza, I call it. Like you go in, you look at the pizza menu, you don't know what you want. You know, there's nothing just like pepperoni pizza. It's just like, oh, we have the delicious delicacy pizza. We have the Fuego Fuente pizza. We have the Down Under pizza, whatever. You know, they got like funny names for everything, right? Where's the pepperoni, bro? Come on. Give me crust, sauce, cheese, pepperoni. You know? I'm so old school, I guess, you know? But then again, I just don't get out much these days, right? I've had some good pizza. I've had some good bougie pizza. You know, I lived in Seattle for a long time. Let me tell you, the West Coast doesn't have any good pizza. I mean, there's a couple of places, but what they're trying to do is like the good pizza places just try to emulate New York pizza, right? There's this one place, it's called Luigi's, a pizza, you know? They're really good. They have like these huge slices, you know? Like I'm talking like an 80-degree angle pizza, you know what I mean? Like a big fat slice. That's really good. You know, they have like a pepperoni jalapeno they serve just like by the slice. That's really good. And there's a couple of other places too. But for the most part, Seattle, it's not a great town for pizza. In fact, anywhere on the West Coast, not great for pizza. It's not like over here where you have like, you know, Italian families starting a mom and pop pizza place. It's not the same. They just don't have the same stuff, you know? But I did work at a pizza place in Seattle, you know? And I don't really know how I would describe that pizza that we would make. It was a franchise, right? So let's get into my work history with pizza. I worked at a place called Z Pizza, all right? And Z Pizza is a franchise, and there was only one location in the state of Washington, and that was the one that I worked at in Capitol Hill in Seattle, right on Broadway, 1620 Broadway. Z Pizza is no longer there. I worked there from like 2014 up until they closed, coincidentally in like 2015, right? But that said, you know, it was probably my favorite job I've ever had. It wasn't the best job I've ever had, right? But it was definitely one of my favorites. I had a great time working there, for a few different reasons. I mean, number one, you work at a pizza place. That means you get free pizza all the time. You know, like you get like free slices, you know, at the end of the night, you get to take whatever's left home. You know what I mean? I think there was a deal. Basically, you get like a free pizza every time you work, you know, just make it yourself though, is the deal. So it was great. You know, you get like the hookup on pizza all the time. And, the thing about working at Z Pizza though, I lived with everybody who worked there. You know, it was one of those situations. Like everybody who worked there, like lived and like partied together. You know, we would all just like hang out with each other, like at work, after work, on the weekends, just all the time. It's all the same people. In a way, the pizza place was very cliquey in that way, you know, which was honestly, it was good because I felt like I was a part of a large group of people, you know, and that was nice because there's a lot of camaraderie. You definitely get to know people. And you just got people to hang out with all the time. You know, I would say like during that time of my life, I was much more into like the night vibes, you know, like going to bars. I mean, if you live in Capitol Hill and you're like in your mid 20s, you're going to have the time of your life, right? At least you could back then in like 2014, right? I'm sure things have changed at this point, but I feel like I was there at kind of a pivotal time for Seattle. I mean, things certainly were changing for a long time up until I moved there in like 2013. But around that time, you started to notice a lot of changes. Like a lot of the older buildings in Capitol Hill started getting torn down in favor of like high rises going up, apartment buildings going up. A lot of the buildings that I saw, even when I moved there, were gone a couple of years later, you know? In fact, like the entirety of Broadway is completely different from when it was when I lived there, you know? Like now there's like a whole light rail station that didn't exist when I moved there. There's a whole, just like the entire street is just like covered with different buildings now. It's just crazy. The entire place is different. Like before, you would be able to walk down the street, you get a good view of the park. You know, they had like the, so many like quirks in Seattle. The thing is like if you live in Capitol Hill and you just like walk everywhere, you see the same people every day. And it's really interesting sort of being in a place that's as, you know, popular and famous as Seattle and seeing familiar faces all the time, no matter where you go, you know? It's just really cool. And Capitol Hill, by the way, is like right. I mean, it's essentially downtown. I mean, it's just like up the hill. Like you could just walk downtown, walk to the Space Needle, walk to Pike Place. It's all like in the same vicinity. It's walking distance, you know? It's not like when you live in like one of the outskirt sort of towns that Seattle has. Like, you know, I mean, there's a lot of like neighborhoods in Seattle. Like there's University District, Capitol Hill. There's like a lot of surrounding areas. Like there's Bellevue and Redmond and Kirkland and things like that. Renton and Tacoma's further south. It's a different city. But in like central area there's like downtown, Capitol Hill, and then there's like Central District. And like this entire like range is where I was delivering pizza all the time. You know, like I would just deliver pizza to downtown Seattle all of the time. That was in our delivery range. We had a 2-mile radius around our store, and it would just cover basically Broadway is like smack dab in the middle of a lot of things going on. It was right on the corner of Pine and Broadway. And Pine, if you go down Pine all the way, you'll end up at Pike Place Market, right? So if you go down the hill, I mean, that's it, you know? That's where everything is. So, you know, the way that we delivered pizza was on mopeds, you know? And that was a blast. Like being in my mid-20s, being able to like go out, have nightlife, having free pizza every day, making tips to kind of get by, you know, like, yeah, I was broke a lot of the time, but I was having fun every day. You know, that's how I felt. Like, even if I felt like I was like struggling sometimes, like, you know, I was kind of having the time of my life at the same time. Right. Like I got to just see the sights. I got to be there at a really kind of cool time of my life. You know, I definitely learned a lot living in Seattle. In fact, I learned a lot about like what my limitations are, right? When I started working at Z Pizza, I had to learn how to ride a moped, which, by the way, is really similar to riding a bicycle, right? But the difference is that it accelerates when you hit the thing, right? That's the only difference between riding a bicycle and riding this thing. You just need to know when to brake because that's a little more important, you know? And also, don't stick your feet out. So in my first couple of weeks of working at Z Pizza, I started there pretty much right around Valentine's Day, 2014. And I remember that because previously I was working at a burger place called Blue Moon Burgers. Place is pretty suspicious. Maybe I'll get into that some other time. But I was working at this burger place for like 8 months. And at a certain point, they did the thing where they just gave me like one less shift over a period of weeks until eventually they only had me scheduled for one shift in a week. And it was on Valentine's Day. And that day, this is the only time I've ever done this. I called up the place and I wanted to talk to the manager. And I said, hey, I'm not coming in. Go fuck yourself. Right? Pardon my language. Maybe I'll bleep that out. That was the only time I've ever done that. But I really feel like they screwed me over. I felt like I was a hard worker. Maybe I just didn't fit the vibe, but they didn't communicate that at all. Right? They just like started scheduling me less and less. which really sucks. But because I was living with all these people who worked at the pizza place, Z Pizza, I easily got a job over there. Like I called up Ritu, that's her name. And I said, hey, Ritu, it's Justin. Look, this pizza place or this burger place I'm working at, they stopped scheduling me. I'm wondering if you have any openings. She said, yep, come on by, fill out a thing and we'll get you on shift. And I'm like, oh, thank you. You know, like I just had a job instantly. It was really cool. You know, I mean, at that point I was a pretty familiar face around the pizza place. Cause again, I was living with all these people. And how I met them, by the way, is because I used to work at the yogurt place next door. So my first job in Seattle, I was working at Yogurtland, and that was an interesting experience because I'm lactose intolerant. You know, I only worked there for a few months. It was just kind of something to get me by until I found something that paid a little bit more. I ended up meeting somebody just at like one of the house parties. Because at that point I moved in with the people who worked at Z Pizza because I became really friendly with them, and they said, hey, you know, there's a spot in our basement. You know, I was living in a basement on the couch, but it's what it is. You know, you got to live somewhere, you know, so you just need a roof over your head, start making some money. It is what it is, you know, but you make the most of it. But of course the house we're living in with like all of these people in their mid-20s, it was definitely a party house, you know. And we had like a clown themed party one year. And again, that was like 2013 or so at that point. And I think it was right around Halloween, you know, so like Halloween-ish 2013, there was like just like a costume party. I think it was specifically a clown theme though, you know, and I was playing poker in the kitchen, and somebody who was working there at the burger place was also playing poker. And I was just talking about, hey, I work at Yogurtland, yada, yada, yada. And she was like, hey, well, if you need a job working at this burger place, I'm the manager. And I said, oh, how much do you pay? And she said, oh, we pay X amount. We make a lot in tips. And I said, okay, you know what? Fine. I'll work there. She said, great, cool, done. So I just started working at the burger place, right? In Seattle, it's really about who you know, especially if you work in like food service, you know? Everybody who works in food service, everybody who kind of lives in that area, everybody knows each other in one way or another, right? Again, you walk around, there's a lot of familiar faces, you know? And it's really cool to sort of think back and feel like I kind of like fit in, especially in a city like that. It was super cool, you know? But, you know, that said, I worked at this burger place. They stopped putting me on shift. I started working at Z Pizza, and I had to learn how to ride a moped. It was a 50cc, just you know, like a 50cc scooter with a box on the back to hold pizzas, you know? And we had like the heating bags. You put the heating bag in another bag to hold in the heat even more. You put that in the box in the back of the scooter and you just drive off, you know? Get there ASAP because that pizza might get cold, right? So I learned how to drive a moped. It wasn't easy. You definitely, when you're learning, are prone to crashing out, you know, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And yeah, you know, you kind of take a tumble sometimes, you know, you're riding on the scooter, you slide the wrong way or you brake the wrong way or whatever. You just kind of fall over. It happens, you know, sometimes even if, you know, instead of getting in like an accident, if you're like about to like get into a scary situation, it's always better to just lay the scooter down on the ground, you know, lay it down, get out of the way. Right. And that happens, you know, like just whatever. Shit happens. Sometimes you fall. And especially in a city like Seattle, you know, especially in like February or January, it's just hella rainy. It doesn't really get snowy, I will say. It did snow a few times, but for the most part, it was just like rainy all the time, you know? Now, you know, learning how to ride a scooter, having it be super wet out, it got a little dangerous. All right. So a couple of weeks working there, you know, I was really kind of starting to get the hang of things. It was a really busy night. I think it was like a Friday. And again, it was like, probably a couple of weeks after Valentine's Day. I was just doing my thing. I was hustling, like I was a hard worker, and I had to take like 4 pizza orders at the same time, So my box, the pizza box, this cube on the back of the scooter was full of pizza, that shit was heavy, right? So it's a nasty night. Like it starts getting rainy. It starts getting like, it's February. So it starts like, I remember there was hail, a little bit of hail coming down as well. It was just nasty. Fortunately I had like a leather coat I was wearing. So, like I wasn't like suffering like heat wise or anything or like wet wise, but it was just a nasty night. Like the roads were slick and all that stuff. Now, driving down Broadway, there is a trolley that goes down Broadway. And for that reason, there's like metal rails going down Broadway in Seattle, going up to First Hill, which is where the hospitals are. So I was driving to drop off my first delivery, which is up in First Hill, just driving up Broadway, when, there's a little bit of traffic. I'm sticking between the lines, I got to a point where I had to slow down, and I braked, and I hit the rail, and I slipped, and the scooter fell down and crushed my foot. Ow. Big ow. Like I'm talking like driving, and then you brake, and then it just kind of like shoomp, just like a foam, like a smack right down on the ground. And there was there was like some construction going on too. And when I fell down, one of the construction workers came up to me and they were like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" Because they saw me like crash out, And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine. It is what it is." And I started limping a little bit, and I really didn't think much of it. I thought like, okay, maybe I like twisted my ankle. I can walk it off. It'll be fine. Right. But so I drop off the first pizza. I'm limping to get to the door. And by the way, if you crash out on a scooter, the pizza's going to get fucked up, like it's going to slide to one side of the box. Like, okay, the pizza's just going sideways. You know what I mean? Like it's not good. Right. It happens, sometimes you have to do a refire or like give people a refund if something like that happens. It doesn't happen often, but again, shit happens, but anyway, I drop off the first order and they said, "Oh my God, are you okay?" Cause I was limping. I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. I just, got into a little bit of an accident over there. If something's wrong with your pizza, just call the store. We'll get it taken care of." They said, "Okay. All right." So I dropped that one off. I go down the hill. I drop off the next one down in like Pioneer Square. Same thing. I'm just kind of limping, I'm trying to just keep it together. Right. And, I drop off all the orders and I am struggling, man. It took me a long time to get back, probably like an hour, to make these 4 deliveries, which is a long time. Like anything like more than like 15 minutes per order is a long time when you're delivering pizza. So for me to take 4 orders and it takes like at least 20 minutes each is just, it's a long time. Right. So, because we kept getting orders in at the time, and they, because it was taking so long, they had to call in somebody else to help out. It is what it is. I mean, I wasn't the only driver that night, but like, even then, we had somebody else driving, taking orders back and forth, and they had to call on a third person too, which is rare, So, and even at that point, like I was still relatively new and they knew like, maybe he's taking a little bit longer than he needs to or whatever. But I get back to the store and I'm limping and they're like, "Oh my God, you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's fine. I'm just gonna keep working." They said, "What happened?" And they said, "Well, I got in a little accident, And they said, "Oh, it's all right. Well, okay." And they kept making pizza and it was just like line of tickets. Got to take them down. I got to keep going, And, I worked through the night, I worked through the night And by the time the end of the night came along, what we did after work usually is we go over to the karaoke bar called the Rock Box. It's like a little like Japanese style karaoke place right around the corner. And we go and we do karaoke, have a few beers, and then go home, But I go to this karaoke place, and I'm standing there and I'm having a beer and I'm still limping. But like at this point, like after being like upright and like walking on my foot all night long, I was like, I am in a lot of pain and I need to go home, And it was rare for me to like kind of like give in to like getting hurt like that, but I had to. I really didn't have a choice. So I said, hey, I got to go home. And at this point, I actually had moved out of, well, we called it the Malden house where all the pizza people worked. And I had like a separate apartment with a couple of other people down in like, not South Seattle, but down South MLK, in a different neighborhood. So I had to take the bus, and I was just like hobbled my way over there. And I was like, you know what, forget it. I got to take an Uber. I had an Uber pick me up, which, I don't like spending money on Ubers. But at that point, I was like, I have to just kind of get home, So yeah, they dropped me off. I went and laid down and I just like passed out because I was just exhausted at that point. And I woke up in the morning and my foot was like a balloon, like I looked down at my foot. I'm like, oh, fuck. I couldn't walk on it. I couldn't touch the ground with it. It was really bad. It was really, really bad. So, I had a roommate at that point. Her name's Kate, not to be confused with my significant other now, a completely different person, right? Who actually coincidentally is from Syracuse, oddly enough. But, anyway, she was my roommate. She's really cool. She helped me get over to the hospital. And this is where things got a little bit tricky, right? Because they took an x-ray and they said, okay, well, it looks like you just kind of sprained your ankle or something. And I said, okay. And they gave me like a boot. I'm like, okay, sure. So I had to call into work that night. I said, hey, I got hurt, like I'm injured. I can't walk right now. It's probably going to be a couple of weeks or whatever, So, they also asked me at that time, hey, did this happen to you while you were working? Because if so, we're going to have you talk to an occupational doctor, which gets a little bit more like on the legal side of things, right? For like Washington benefits and things like that, And at first I said yes. Which, because it did happen at work, like, yeah, maybe it was my mistake for something happening or whatever. Right. But it technically was a work related incident. I was delivering pizza. I got injured. Right. So they started seeing me there and they wanted to do a follow-up appointment just to check in because it was a work related injury, just to check on me a little bit more. Well, I met with this doctor and he said, okay, so it's a work-related injury. Let's go ahead and do some additional tests to see what's going on. And I said, okay, all right. So they took a CT scan this time and it showed that my foot, basically my ankle, like the section of my ankle was just crushed. It was pretty bad, It's like if like a tectonic plate shifted, Not good. My foot was fucking broken, That's not good, right? Like what the hell do you do when your job is delivering pizza and you're like in your mid-20s and you need to make tips to survive, Like what do you do? Right? So you know, it was a tough call, right? Like, what the hell do I do? So I called up Ritu, the owner of the pizza place, and I said, hey, I went to the doctor and they said my foot's broken. Like, I can't work, And she said, oh my God, okay. And I said, yeah, well, because it's a work related thing, I'll let them know that. And she said, what? And I said, well, maybe I won't get into that. Okay. But let's just say me and Ritu worked out a deal so that I was still making part-time money without having to work. I mean, effectively it would save her on insurance, but I was still getting paid, right? But the part-time work thing wasn't going to be enough for me to make rent, because I did rely on tips at that point. So what the hell do you do? I had to move back home for 3 months, And man, let me tell you, I was miserable. Like, I was only gone for a year at that point, and I was not ready to come back. But I came crawling back home with crutches and a cast on my foot. And, well, it is what it is. I was just miserable for 3 months, just waiting to go back, But, that's it. But you know what? After 3 months of healing and a cast, one of the more difficult things to do is to not use, well, basically because it was an injury from Washington, my insurance that would cover it was also in Washington, right? But that also means that, I had to go see a doctor in New York for a Washington injury, basically, which is really difficult to do. I don't know why it's so difficult to cross state lines with different insurance, but it was. So I, because to find a Washington benefits place, I would have had to go from here to Rochester or something. And I called that office and they said, hey, that doctor's not even here anymore. I'm like, well, what the hell? So I had to lie. I had to go to an urgent care and lie to them and say, hey, I got injured in Washington. They said it would be ready to come off in 3 months. It's been 3 months. Just use my insurance, right? Because at the time, my parents got divorced and I had insurance till I was 26. You know what I mean? So just use the normal insurance. Just take this cast off, please. Do an x-ray, whatever. And let me go on my way. All right, please. And they did. They took the cast off. And, I was still a little limpy, but I was good to go, And not only was I good to go, I was ready to go, to just get back to Washington at that point. And my mom was ready for me to go too, which is funny because, she missed me dearly until I got there and I was miserable. And she was like, okay, I've had enough. But I don't blame her. I was being a kind of a piece of shit at that point. But it is what it is. I ended up going back to Washington and I continued to work at Z Pizza. Now, again, I had only worked there for a little bit. I was making some part-time money, just kind of being there. So I went back to work. And let me tell you, I was better than ever. I got back there. I got back to work. I was ready to frickin' go. I'm back on shift. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to help in any way I can. I appreciate you giving me that part-time, just money, just coming in, just passively, right? And I'm just ready to go. I'm here. Let me work my ass off for you, And I did. I was like, okay, I'm going to deliver pizza. I'm going to make record times. The weather's better now, so it's not going to be as dangerous anymore. It was in the summer at this point, right? And I was just, I worked there for a solid year after that. And I was like, I'd like to say I was a really good delivery driver, right? I made some really fast times, just going. Okay, I remember one time I had to deliver to the 8th story in a tower in downtown Seattle. I made it from Capitol Hill down there and back in 14 minutes. And that's pretty crazy, right? I was very, very fast. But I was cruising. I was cruising around Seattle. I know the streets of Capitol Hill like the back of my hand. I know how to get anywhere in the entire, like, that 3-mile radius of just Seattle, you know? And that's cool. That's cool that I have like a really intimate knowledge of every side street, every shortcut to take. I have a very intimate knowledge of Seattle, you know, and in a way that you can only really get by delivering pizza to almost every building there. You know, I saw a lot of really cool views, met a lot of really cool people, got a lot of really good tips, some not so good tips. But I was not only delivering, but I was making pizza, you know. Part of my responsibilities was like, I was an opener most of the time. So I'd get there in the morning. I'd have to get the dough ready. I'd have to make the dough. I'd have to make the ingredients. I have to prep everything. I would have to make the pizza. A lot of times when you get there early, like I have to get there at like 9 in the morning. We open at 11. It takes a couple of hours to get everything prepped and ready to go. Because you have to heat up the oven and everything and, you know, get things ready, right? A lot of times we would have like a $400 order that we had to get at opening, like out the door, you know? And in those days, it would be me, one other person, and Ritu sometimes. And we just had to like make like 10 pizzas, bam, 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 you know? Here's this pizza, here's this pizza, here's this pizza, here's this pizza. Done, 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 done. Down the line, down the line, down the line. Sometimes it would be multiple of those. You know, I remember one morning we had like 3 $400 orders we had to make for like within 30 minutes of each other. And that was wild, you know, but we did it, you know, we hustled. I've made a lot of pizza. I've made a lot of dough. And it was a great time, you know? So, you know, it was stressful, definitely had its ups and downs, but that's partly why it was one of my favorite jobs ever. Like I wasn't making much money. I was making tips, sure, but I was working with friends. I was able to like have a good nightlife. I was able to see the sights, and I was basically just riding a motorcycle around Seattle every day. That was my job, you know? And I got free pizza and free shift beer at the end of the shift too. So there's that, you know? It was a blast. Like, yeah, I didn't make much money, but damn, you know, I don't think there's a better job I could have had at that time. So cool stuff. Again, though, it did end up closing down. And it was right around the 4th of July the following year. Again, I only worked there for about a year in total. Because it did end up closing down. And there was like a whole news story about what was going on. But it had a lot to do with like the minimum wage in Seattle going up for corporations first. It was like the first wave of the $15 minimum wage thing at that point. But again, this pizza place is a franchise. But this is the only Z Pizza in the state of Washington. It had 10 employees. It had one owner who was maintaining this place. But for some reason, they considered it under the same umbrella as a corporate location, right? Which means that even though this is basically a small business, one location in this state, no funding. In fact, you have to pay franchise fees to keep this place up and running, right? But they considered it a corporation, and Ritu would have to increase the minimum wage by over 50% effectively, right? Because I think it was like $9.32, and then it would increase to 15, you know? So it's like, damn, you know? So it's no wonder they closed down. Just couldn't afford to keep the doors open anymore. But, you know, at the end of the day, it was a blast. But the thing about working at a pizza place, you know, we sold pizza by the slice. Again, you get to know people. You walk to work, you see people all the time. You know what store was right next to our pizza place? Was GameStop. Now, when I was living and working at this pizza place, I used to serve pizza to the manager of GameStop almost every day. He would come over, get a couple of slices and a soda. And sometimes I say, okay, soda's free today, or okay, you get half price, you get the employee discount, whatever, right? I would hook him up. His name's Sean. I would hook him up all the time, and he would see my work ethic, I guess, and just me hustling, me dealing with people, me talking to customers, me doing work all the time. And when this pizza place closed down, he was looking for an assistant manager, and he said, "Hey, you want to work here?" And he did an interview with me. He said, "Okay, you're in. Done. Easy." Like, I got in there and I was immediately made the assistant manager. Like, I trained as like the SGA, which is like the key holder, basically, position. And after a month, I got bumped up to assistant manager, just like that, Some people who were already working there apparently were upset about that, which understandable, right? Because I had only been working there for a month. I already got a promotion. But that kind of led me to another chapter of my life, right? Where I started kind of working, at least at that point, tangentially to the video game industry. And it was pretty cool. You start getting like the employee discount for playing video games, and you have to become really knowledgeable about video games. And, throughout my life, I had always been kind of like a passive gamer. Like, I didn't really own at that point, like the newest systems or anything like that. But started working at GameStop. I really got into it as, a major hobby of mine, which kind of follows me to this day at this point. Especially when it comes to a lot of things, and especially around that time, it was a really kind of interesting time to be a gamer. Like, this was like Xbox One, PS4 era, also the Wii U. And that was kind of a joke between us, right? Just like the Wii U sales and like trying to sell Wii U's and just telling people like, hey, Nintendo doesn't really make new Wii U games anymore, just like giving people a heads up before they buy one of those. Be like, hey, you can get the Wii U or you can get a PS4 with like Batman, So it's like, all right. But there were perks working at GameStop, like we would get like free games. Again, we got like the employee discount and stuff. There was also this training program that PlayStation did where one employee from a store could do this like training thing, and they could end up getting just a free PlayStation 4. And at the time, like, that's a $300 console. That's crazy, And I was begging, I was pleading, like, please. There was this other guy working there. His name is Devin. I said, please, Devin, just let me do this. Let me get a PlayStation 4, man. For God's sake, just let me get this. Because he already had one, I could get a freebie and, He's like, all right, fine. Like, I begged and I pleaded. I was like, please, God, please, just let me have this. And he let me do it. And I got a free PS4 from Sony. And that's really cool. That was kind of like the first step where I was like, oh, snap. We got perks. We get the cool stuff. Like, dang. But yeah, working at like a really central location in Seattle and selling video games was really, really cool. Now, keeping in mind too, like, Seattle is like, it's home to a lot of these companies. I mean, specifically Microsoft with Xbox and Nintendo. Nintendo's in Redmond. It's right down the street from Microsoft, right? Sony's in California, right? But that's two of the big three at that point, just like right in town. Not to mention Valve is in town too. That's three of the big four, if anything, right? It's crazy. So, I mean, being like involved with the video game industry and like working at GameStop and just being in that kind of location was also really cool. I will say working at GameStop is much more of like a sales position than anything else, than anything even like video game related. But I got to tell you, picking up a passion in video games makes you a better salesman. It certainly does. Having a passion for what you're talking about all the time and being able to speak to things makes you much more able to convince people to buy things, it's, it's a skill, being able to sell stuff at the end of the day. But that said, you work at GameStop. You don't make much money. I will say it was more than I was making hourly at the pizza place, but I wasn't making tips anymore. So I was actually kind of making less money than anything else, But, I worked at this store for a year. I worked a lot of launches during that time at this specific store. Like, I think there was like when Call of Duty Black Ops 3 came out. That was when Fallout 4 came out. It was when No Man's Sky came out. I worked there. A lot of these releases. I worked at that store for a year. After a year of being a relatively successful salesperson, I was given the opportunity to interview for a store manager position in West Seattle. And, I did the interview with the district manager. He was familiar with my work ethic and what I was capable of doing. And he considered me kind of a success story. He gave me the store. I was surprised. There were a lot of other people applying for it too, but I got the store, And let me tell you, West Seattle sucks. Okay. A lot of crime, a lot of theft, just not a great area to effectively be a video game pawn shop. People would go over to Target, they'd steal PlayStation controllers and try to sell them to us. We have to tell them, hey, you can't sell that. You can't sell things that are like still shrink wrapped. That's a policy. In fact, we had to be really strict and say, hey, we've seen it in shrink wrap. We're not going to get it from you anymore. We're not going to buy it from you because we know you got it new. Even if you go outside and crack it open, we know now you're on camera. You know what I mean? But man, working at that GameStop was wild. Working there sucked, but the perks were still really good. When you're a manager at GameStop, at least back then, they had a conference that all of the managers, it was mandatory to go to it, right? And GameStop would pay for your hotel. They would pay for your flight to go. And it was just this huge video game conference where they go over all of the releases that were coming out during the holiday season. It would always be in the fall, like in August. And the year that I went, it was in Anaheim, which is in California, like right next to Disneyland. It was like at the Expo Center in Anaheim. They do a lot of other conventions and stuff there too. It was a really cool experience. I got to be, I got a hotel with my previous manager, Sean. So we got a hotel room together. That was really cool. Our district manager took us out to a nice restaurant. That was cool. And it was, I mean, it was fun going to this conference thing, but it was still work, like you had to get up like 7 a.m. to go to these like conference meetings. It was just like long days, but you got to just hear about video games all day long. There was a lot of like third-party publishers and things like that there. And also all of the major game studios were there too. Microsoft, Nintendo, Sony, they were all there. That was really cool. So this is like 2016 when I went to that. So this is right around the time when, Xbox was just coming out with the Xbox One S. PlayStation was coming out, the PS4 Pro at that point. All this stuff, right? So, that year they had these huge conferences and they announced to the crowd, Sony was presenting and they said, hey, everybody here is getting a free PlayStation 4 Pro. And then Microsoft comes on stage. Phil Spencer, the president of Microsoft Gaming, and he comes on stage and says, hey, everybody here is getting a free Xbox One S. Limited edition, green. It's like, oh, damn, dude. So that year, I got a free Xbox. I got a free PlayStation. I got a bunch of games for free. Like I got the new Forza game. I got the new Call of Duty for free. I got Final Fantasy for free. I got just tons of stuff. Like being a manager at GameStop, you get hooked the hell up. It was crazy. We even got like the Pokemon game that came out that year for free, Sun and Moon, you know? Those ones I gave away to my employees because, you know, I'm a manager, right? But a lot of the other stuff, like nobody wanted it. I kept it, right? It's crazy. Like you got hooked up like crazy. The trade-off is that you have to work through hell for the holiday season, you know? Absolute black hole hell for a solid 3 months. It's just a blackout period. You can't take time off. The days are long. You have extended hours. You have to work Black Friday. It's like you have to be there at 4 a.m, you know? It was just insane. And it was just completely chaotic, you know? We would receive shipments upon shipments at my store of product. It was just insane. Like we got like 5-6 large boxes of product daily, and trying to maintain effectively like a $2 million store, just constant line of people day in and day out. It was hard to leave the register to handle anything else, you know, at least with the hours we were given. That's the thing about GameStop too, is you have to accommodate for like payroll hours all the time. And it's really challenging to do that when you need to keep your store staffed. You need to keep selling product. You need to put things away. You need to make sure prices are up to date. You need to do your counts of all your games and your consoles in the back room and all this stuff. On top of taking in trade-ins, on top of trying to trade in phones, and at that time also selling Cricket phone plans, you know, it was just complete chaos, you know. That was the most stressful period of my life. So yeah, you got hooked the hell up. But I got to tell you, after that season was over, after like Christmas season, like winded down in January, I started immediately looking for other jobs. I was like, I cannot do this again. This is going to kill me. Like, this is not good, right? I honestly think that working at GameStop is like what made me start drinking more, if anything. It really did. It was not good. And a lot of other people say the same thing too. Like you go on Reddit and the GameStop subreddit, people say the same thing. They're like, yeah, GameStop and maybe start drinking. It's really bad for your health, like all this other stuff, you know. Definitely don't recommend working at GameStop. Things have changed now too. Things are way different now too. It's just, you know, and, you know, there was also a lot of controversies with GameStop at the same time. Like there was the whole Circle of Life thing where Kotaku came out with an article and it was exposed. It was an expose about GameStop's sales tactics and things like that, where we had this Circle of Life, right? And effectively, the Circle of Life is like what generated sales. So basically, you sell new games by getting people to trade in old games, okay? And those trade-ins, you could do bonuses to get for pre-orders. And, you know, pre-orders, you sell pro memberships as well. And then you get the discounts on the used games. And it's just a full circle, right? The way that GameStop makes their money is with a couple of different things. One being pre-owned games and another being selling warranties. That's a huge profit generator for them. In fact, at one point we were told that it's something like 98% profit for selling a warranty, you know? Out of 100 that you sell, like 2 people will actually redeem it. You know, it's a huge money maker for them. I'm not going to say scam, but I would say some of the sales tactics were definitely on the suspicious side, to say the least. I won't get into that today. We are running a little bit low on time. But that's a little bit about my experience working at GameStop, you know. Also a little bit about my experience working with a pizza place, okay? Now, I did mention that I wanted to do a new segment, and I do still want to do it. I know I'm running a little bit low on time, but this new segment is called Album of the Week. So without further ado, Album of the Week. Yeah. This album of the week is In the Aeroplane Over the Sea by Neutral Milk Hotel. This is a record that actually came out in the late 90s. Actually, it says here 1996, 1997 by Jeff Mangum, the band Neutral Milk Hotel. It's effectively an indie record, kind of folky, but there's a lot of lore with this one specifically. In fact, this one in online circles is kind of a meme in a funny way, right? You might even see this album art pop up here and there. People don't know, is this a tambourine? Is it a drum? Is it a potato? Nobody really knows, right? But the artwork on this is really amazing. Check this out. It's very much like an old sort of classical style newspaper from like the 1930s or something. And there's a lot of really interesting themes with this album. One theme is that a lot of it actually has to do with Anne Frank. There's this whole sort of overarching narrative about the narrator of this album basically falling in love with Anne Frank and building a time machine to go back in time and save her, right? There's like this whole theme about that, right? And just like saving Anne Frank and bringing her to like the future. A lot of people, oddly enough, think that Jeff Mangum, the singer and songwriter of this whole record, actually built a time machine and brought Anne Frank to the future to save her life, you know? So there's like an alternate reality where Anne Frank is actually saved through a time machine built by the singer of Neutral Milk Hotel. All right. So that's a funny thing, right? But there's also a theme of like coming of age is a big part of this record too. Dealing with familial trauma is a big part of this too. And just some of the lyrics in here are just incredible. You know, it really strikes a chord, literally, you know. In fact, the first track I think might be my favorite. It's actually the first and second tracks, really. It's called The King of Carrot Flowers, right? And it just kind of brings about the thought of an imagination, being a teenager and growing up in like a traumatic environment. It kind of goes back and forth between sort of like falling in love with somebody as like a teenager and also a theme of like your parents are like abusing each other at the same time, you know? Really interesting stuff. And honestly, a lot of it does resonate with me. Not necessarily saying that my parents were abusive, by no means, especially my mother, right? But having been in a relationship in the past where it wasn't the greatest, right? I could almost put myself in the shoes of like the father in that situation, right? In fact, one of the lyrics here is, one second. Your mom would stick a fork right into daddy's shoulder and your dad would throw the garbage all across the floor as we would lay and learn what each other's bodies were for. So again, it's sort of like that theme of like your parents are abusing each other, right? Like your dad is just losing his shit. Your mom's like stabbing him with a fork. Meanwhile, we're learning what love is, you know? So there's a lot of like intimate themes, a lot of like familial themes. And again, this whole like theme of like Anne Frank as well is pretty interesting. This album, typically speaking, if you go look up reviews, it's going to get 9s or 10 out of 10s. It might not be everybody's thing, but I definitely recommend it. If you haven't heard it before, it's only like a 30, 40-minute listen. And it's really good. You know, it's the kind of album, if you sit down and listen to it, it's definitely an album experience. It might make you cry. But yeah, that's In the Aeroplane Over the Sea by Neutral Milk Hotel. All right. I don't want to get claimed for copyright or anything, so I'm not going to play any snippets. But just know that it's a lot of like acoustic. So like a lot of like acoustic strumming and really loud singing, you know, which is really interesting. So it's not like screaming, but it's just like just loud, like singing from the gut, like outward, you know? So it's like really powerful singing in a way, in an indie kind of folky style, you know? So anyway, Neutral Milk Hotel in the Airplane Over the Sea. That's the album of the week. Album of the week. Yeah. Anyway, folks, that just about does it for today's show. I appreciate you being here. This one's a little bit longer than usual, and I am recording it in a different way as well, so I do hope it works out. But anyway, thanks for being here. I appreciate you, and see y'all next time. JuGrTalk.